That's why it was downgraded.
And that was one of the relevant considerations, yes.
Okay, so with the process you're describing, whereby you use a process and risk and consequence and all the good tables that I've seen in your submission, do you consider balancing that against the cost of action? And I'll take, for example, the New Zealand Flight Information Service, where in Australia, if there's a deteriorating weather situation, they have an obligation to update the pilot and alert them to the fact that something's occurring. Or the Unicom operator, who was not legally allowed to use the HF radio to talk. But if either of them had actually said the situation is getting worse, as Unicom did to the New Zealand FIS, who chose not to pass it on, surely even including that kind of thing with a recommendation that the Australian government should talk to the New Zealand government and ask that for safety reasons, even if it's only 1 in 1,000 flights, therefore your probability of occurrence is very low, given that the cost of action is also very low, why does your process exclude consideration of something that to the common man in the street seems like common sense? Why are we not seeing logical, reasonable recommendations coming out of ATSB reports to address, in this case, two things, either of which probably would have prevented the accident?
There are probably two things there, Senator, and I might go to the question of recommendations first before I get to the specifics of your question. The ATSB, at the point where it became independent of the Department of Infrastructure and Transport, also got a shift in its powers in relation to the making of recommendations, which raised the ante with recommendations and their significance. There's a requirement, a legal requirement, to actually respond to each of the recommendations we make. In recognition of that, we set up the system of identifying safety issues that said needs to be a critical or a significant safety issue before we will explicitly use that power to make a recommendation and require a response. And we will generally limit recommendations to those sorts of things. So what you're talking about, we would, in our normal framework, I suspect, given it's what you say about likelihood and consequence, deal with that as a safety issue without going to recommendation. So that's just context. It's still there, but your question remains. I suppose the answer is we assessed the facts of the information that was available, made available in the course of the flight, the number of opportunities to receive the information, to absorb it, and to say that that didn't seem to indicate that there needed to be any change to the system. That's a matter that others, based on those facts, could form different views on, but the view we formed was we weren't seeing anything that needed to be done to enhance that system.
Mr. Dolan, with all due respect, to have a process that deliberately closes the door to suggestions that another agency, if they wish to say we respond to that recommendation by saying no, but if they chose to say yes, may have saved this flight and may well potentially save another flight, can I suggest to you is a process that is extremely poorly misplaced and prioritised?
I accept you can suggest that to me, Senator. As I say, I and we, collectively as an organisation, were trying to look at this on a systemic level rather than individual detail level. What are the overall components of the current system that's in place to deal with the risks that go with operation to remote islands, and the particular case we were dealing with, which was the situation where the weather forecast on departure is for weather suitable for landing at your destination, and that changes en route. That seemed to us the key issue. There was also an issue about what happened pre-flight planning and so on, but for us, as we say in our report, the key issue was, having left, how do you deal with the the situation where things change in flight. What we tend to do in identifying safety issues is, rather than specifying here is a precise solution to the issue, we try and draw the attention to the issue to the attention of those who are best placed to do something about it and to take steps to deal with it. Now that's certainly something we could have a discussion about. It's the methodology we currently use. And so rather than saying precisely there is a problem explicitly with the issue of the proactive provision of weather information by air traffic control, we focused on the general framework that was to support information and to the seeking of information and the provision of information and decision making en route. So we left it as a general issue rather than coming up with a precise set of answers and making those a requirement. That's the way we normally do the business. We try to leave it to the organisation best positioned. In this case, we saw it as the Civil Aviation Safety Authority, principally, to decide how best to deal with the issue and to tell us what is being done to address the issue, which is the safety action part of our report.
Mr Dolan, I think you've probably heard a number of the witnesses this morning indicate that certainly in their view, ATSB in the past has taken a far more proactive approach to identifying issues and being prepared to make a recommendation, and the general consensus from witnesses has been that that is actually a far more value-adding document. Can I ask, with a technical issue, for example, where we see an A380 off the northwest shelf and it has a software glitch that causes the aircraft to plunge. Sorry, A330, yes. Now, in terms of probabilities, that was probably very remote that would ever happen again. But there was a report, there were recommendations. I guess the OEM, put a fleet-wide alert out to look at a software reload or whatever they did. If that's the approach taken on something that almost led to the loss of an aircraft, here we have the loss of an aircraft, why do you then take such a conservative approach as opposed to saying any information, any opportunity to preclude a further incident by including all of the regulatory, systemic issues in terms of the organisation, their training, their check and training, the lack of control, the lack of standardisation around fuel planning, all of the things that led to this occurrence happening? Why are they not canvassed in the report? And I know I've heard your process, but put the process aside. Is the process wise when, after 3 years, we end up with a report that deals quite narrowly with one element of the things that led to this incident?
And as I said earlier on, Senator, as my general reflection on what I've been hearing both through the submissions and today, there's two elements to this. The first is that there was a range of lines of inquiry that we went down, satisfied ourselves there was not a safety issue involved in it, and among that massive documentation we provided to you, there's a range of lines of inquiry. It's clear we did go down. We did not reflect that process in our report, and on reflection that's not something that is ideal. And so that's the first issue there. So some of the things you're concerned about, our view is we did take a look at and formed the view that they weren't directly relevant to the issues we needed to address in the report.